basically shows it from a different perspective, or a later perspective, and this is burden of disease. You know, we've come a long way in public health. We used to think almost exclusively of mortality, of death, and death is a pretty, you know, there's not a lot of ambiguity about death as a health outcome, right? But what's happened is, as the World Bank and the World Health Organization wanted to switch from just using mortality to look at the effects of health systems to something that was more related to social productivity, they developed a new approach called the burden of disease. And they spent, the World Bank and the World Health Organization spent a lot of money developing methodologies to estimate the burden of disease caused by various illnesses. And I remember when the initial study came out, as many years ago now, and depression at that time was the fourth most burdensome disease in the world. And given the fact that we have such low self-esteem and self-concept in mental health, our first thought was, well, that can't be right. And the NIMH, I remember I was part of a panel put together by the NIMH to look at the science to see whether or not this was really, we should take this seriously or not. As it turns out, it's in fact the case, and by now, I think that's right, at the time they predicted by 2010 depression would be number 2 in the world in terms of overall burden of disease. And what we know now is that if you look at the United States, if you look at developed countries, they have a different profile than developing countries. In developing countries, infectious diseases are still tragically a really big problem. We pretty much eliminated, knock on wood, with MRSA and other sorts of things, eliminated infectious diseases in our country. We're trying to work on chronic disease and productivity. In the United States, the mental illnesses and addictions account for 33% of all disability related to illness. That's twice as much as cardiovascular disease, and about twice as much as hypertension and stroke. These are the most disabling conditions because they occur early in life. We're terrible at recognizing them. We don't give people effective care. They become disabled, etc., etc. And what this does is this just shows you, number one, the burden of disease of depression alone, and then like the earlier slide, it shows you, well, what happens if you have diabetes and depression, asthma, depression, arthritis, and you can see, again, that the moral of the story is there's a big multiplier effect, right? And if we think about, we start to switch our thinking, and don't think about, well, of course you're depressed, you have arthritis, to the fact that the things that are making you depressed may also be things that are putting you at risk for developing arthritis, right? Arthritis, at least rheumatoid arthritis, is a disease of the immune system, right? It's an inflammatory disease. You know that there's relation between exposure to stress and trauma and inflammatory illnesses, the C-reactive protein stuff. You start to think differently about what are we going to do with arthritis. Not only is it important that people who have arthritis get screened for depression and get treatment for it, but I think increasingly we're going to start thinking about the fact that if we're treating the whole person, and if we're taking a lifespan developmental approach, when we see those anxiety and depression problems starting to show up, we know those are sentinel conditions for smoking, inactivity, hanging around with deviant peers, starting to pick up alcohol and other drugs and other substances, and the things that put us at risk for other illnesses that are going to cause our country major problems in terms of